What's up, everyone? I'm back again, and I'm hoping you're having a great holiday season right now and a great New Year, which this video will probably be up right now. It's right before New Year's Eve, actually. And as you probably know, since I put it on my channel as well, I did a little Christmas arrangement on guitar not too long ago. Which was a lot of fun to do. I really enjoyed making it. I really enjoyed doing stuff like that, like just taking really common melodies and trying to put chords behind it. But a lot of you also seem to enjoy it as well, and I even got a few requests to for me to kind of talk about it a little more, maybe post another video about it. So that's what I figured I'd do today. I just kind of talk about how I came up with those chords and how I arranged that whole piece. So that's all I'm going to do today. I'm just going to talk about what I did specifically in that arrangement, and I'm also going to give you some tips for if you want to get started doing that kind of stuff, like actually taking melodies from common songs and just putting your own chords to them. So let's get started. All right, so first, of course, you need a melody, so which I chose Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And of course, you need to know how to play that, so you want to figure out really quickly the melody of the song in whatever key you want to play. In this case, I just chose the key of C major just to keep it simple. And then what you want to do is really pay attention to where those notes are. Because theoretically, you want to make it so those notes right there are the highest notes that you play on the guitar. So for any chord you play, you want those to be the highest notes. So even if you're doing like... which I just took a bunch of random chords there, but really you could do something like that if you really wanted to. And then, of course, if you don't know any chords here, you can also take advantage of the multiple strings on the guitar. So if you can't play it up here, maybe shift it down to here. Or just wherever you could find a chord that you like the sound of. Alright, so getting more in depth with it, the first note in the melody is actually a fifth, so it's the fifth note in the scale. This is, of course, playing off the fifth of the one chord, most likely, at least in the original version. When you're reharmonizing it, you could pretty much apply it to whatever chord you want, but in this case, I wanted to keep it a little simple, just because it's Christmas time. I don't want to overcomplicate it. So one thing I noticed that, well, you could play this triad here. But of course, seventh chords are cooler, so I just I just added a major seventh to that. And that's where I get the first chord. Now really, you could just hang on to that one chord the whole time. And you would get some cool sounds out of that, but I wanted to try kind of making it sound a little interesting. So what I did is I added some extra chords. Now, of course, the really common jazz trick to do is to go 2-5-1. So what I thought to do is I went... and that's where I get those two chords. That's the 2 chord, or the D minor 7 chord, to the 5 chord, which is the G7 chord. And then from there, I figured, oh, there's kind of some space right here. Which, I mean, all those work, and you get a cool little major 13 chord right there. But if I want to add another chord that leads into D minor 7, one thing I could do is add C sharp diminished. So that's where I get this chord. So then, now I have this. Yeah. Now I have this. And then for the second half in the melody, I just repeated the first half. And right here, it goes to the 7th of the major scale, which is really hinting at that 5 chord. So immediately, I just go into G7. And it's good to be in this position now, because that transitions into the next part, which I play down here. And then right there, I see there's a 2 minor 7 chord, or a D minor 7 chord right here. So I decided to use that for that. And now the reason I decided to go there specifically, one is because, well, again, we're hinting at a 2-5-1 kind of sound. But also because it fits nicely with all these extra tones you're adding. So you get... now these two notes are just the third and the root. But then you get this kind of sound, which is a minor 7-13 kind of sound, which is cool. And then you also have this note, which gets you a D minor 7 sus sound for a second. I guess that would just be D7 sus, yeah. D7 sus 4, because there's no third there. So D7 sus 4 for a moment. And again, that's the 2 minor, so you really want to hear the 5 chord next. So what I did was I played, it was kind of awkward for me to play like that kind of thing, so I basically just omitted the root and just played the third on top. So you get that chord. And that leads nicely to this chord. And the next note is this third, or the third of the C major chord, which is E. And then I do that little, just to kind of add a little more flavor to it. That's another really cool skill to have, is to be able to play melodies while holding these chords down. Maybe as an exercise, you can like play the actual scale while holding down a chord. So maybe something like... But anyway, yeah, I'm just thinking of D minor 7 there. And then the next part, I just go to G7 over B. And then, of course, from there, the melody just resets, so it just plays the same exact thing again. But in order to change it up, so I'm not playing the same chords each time, rather than going back to that C major 7 chord, I actually decided to substitute that with an E minor 7 chord. And that's just a diatonic substitution. The reason that works is because if you look at the notes of a C major 7 chord, you get the notes C, E, G, and B. If you replace that with an E minor 7 chord, you get E, G, B, and then D, which is the additional note. That would be like a ninth away from that C. So in a way, you're playing like a C major 9 chord, just without the root note. So then you get... And then all the other chords are just the same. So it's E minor 7 to C sharp diminished 7 to that D minor 7, G7. And then from there I just went back to C major 7. And then back to that G7. And then the next thing I added after that G7, I did a quick diminished 7 chord, or the way I'm thinking of this is I'm basically just bringing this bass note, G, and just adding the flat 9 in the bass. And that gives you a G sharp diminished 7 sound. And then that works just because the dominant 7th chord and the diminished 7th chord are just so closely related. You could just add that note in. And along with that, it also gives you a little bit of voice lane. So you have G, moves up to G sharp, and then the next chord is D minor 7 again. And now on the D string, you're playing A. So there you basically have this line going. Or altogether it sounds like... So when you're making these arrangements, that's another factor you want to start thinking about, is just how you lead all the voices, or the voices meaning basically all the different notes on your different strings. You want to lead your notes effectively instead of just bouncing around like with all these chords all over the place. And then from there it does the same thing again, so D minor 7. And of course here the melody changes again, but I just play it off the same chord. And then instead of playing that same shape, I actually move up to here to get those notes. So you get, which is still G7, and then C major 7. So looking at the bridge section of the song, now we start on note A. Now there's few different places you could take this to. You could just directly take it to A minor, or what I decided to do is I just took it to F major, the 4 chord. Because then I could grab that second note really easily as well. So there the melody note is the third of that chord F, which is A, and then it goes A, C, A, where C is the 5th of that chord. And And then I go back to C major 7 to play the next part, where I play the 5th of C major 7, and then those two notes are G and E. So that's the 5th and the 3rd of that chord. And then the next part I figured out really quickly because it actually fits really comfortably in the minor 2-5-1, so I figured I could do a B minor 7 flat 5, in which the melody note is that flat 5. And you go to the flat 5 to A, which is the minor 7. And from there, I just go to the 5 chord of A. So this is a secondary dominant, basically, going to A minor. But then, instead, the melody note is actually G. So that gives us a nice, the Hendrix chord, basically. Which is a, excuse me, E7, sharp 9. So here you get, and then you get also the flat 9, because that's the melody note as well, so it's going from G to F. So you get, and then that leads nicely to A. So the whole thing is, and then again you can jazz it up with a little going down a half step thing, and then sliding back up. So the next part you have this little walk up. So for that, I basically just went back to D minor 7 and just stayed on that D minor 7 for that whole section. So basically I start with kind of just a 5 chord to get that note. And then from there you have the last 2 strings open for all the rest of the melody notes. So you go. So that gets you a few cool chords where you start with just a 5 and then you add the 3rd and then the sus4 and then the 5th, and then you end on this D minor 7 13, which is a little more dissonant than what we started with, so it kind of progressively gets more dissonant. So then you have this little walk down thing, which is basically just going down D minor pentatonic. So this part I felt like didn't really need any chords specifically, but one thing that I thought was cool, one of my old jazz instructors I remember showed me that it's really cool to just simply add perfect fourths to some melody notes, or add a fourth below it. So for example, we have, so what I did there, I just added a fourth below that, below each note, and that gives you some nice colorful tones. And if you really want to, you can take it a step further and add a perfect fourth below the actual note, if that makes sense. So basically it would sound like this. And that gives you even more of a dissonant sound. But of course I wanted to keep this a little simple, so I just did one. So I think that sounds fine anyway. So after that, we just go back to the main verse, which is just the same thing again. So we'll start on C major 7. What was that? That was bad. But then right there, I actually changed it a little bit. Instead of going back to here, I actually went to this G diminished 7 chord. And the reason why I did that is G diminished 7 is the same thing as a C sharp diminished 7, which is a chord that leads really nicely into D minor 7, which is the next chord I'm going to play. So basically it's like a secondary dominant, this leading up to D minor 7, but with like a flat 9 again. So it's the same concept as before with this, but instead we're trying to lead back into this chord rather than just going from the 5 chord to the 7th chord. And then after that it's just D minor 7 again, and then G7, and then after that I thought it'd be cool to add a little bridge section because I don't want to just end it there. So what I did here is first on here I changed the bass note here to B flat, so I can do a little C7 over B flat kind of sound leading up to F major. So basically that's the secondary dominant to F major 7. And from there I just did a walking bass line basically. So that's just 4 to the 5 chord G9 in this case. And then, excuse me for the coughing, I am still a little sick. But C major going back to or F major 7, and if there, I go back to the minor 251 in A minor 7, or in A minor. And then another thing you can add right here, going into the back into the D minor 7 chord, is you can actually add the secondary dominant of that, of D minor 7, which is going to be A7. So basically you're going from here to a dominant chord on that same note. And that brings you to, and you do the, again, off of the D minor 7 chord. And then the only thing I add here is I just add a big tritone sub right there. So if you don't know what a tritone sub is, typically you'll play G7 as the 5 chord going to C major 7. But if you go to a tritone away from that, so in this case, from G to C sharp, and just play a dominant 7th chord off of C sharp. So in terms of the note G, from there you have C sharp, which is the tritone away from C, or G. And then you're playing the 7th from C or C sharp 7, which is like a major third from G. And then next you have the minor 7th away from G, which is F. And then you have the last note, which in terms of G is the flat 9. So that's just a really common jazz trick. Basically, long story short, you're just playing a 5 chord, but you're just taking that chord and moving it down or up a tritone. And then that leads nicely into the next chord. That's typically the chord you hear when you hear those really loud horn stabs in a lot of jazz pieces. So from there, we just go back. And from here, the only thing I added was a few extra diminished 7th chords. Because, of course, that's hinting at, like I said before, that's hinting at the G7 flat 9 kind of sound. And that brings us... And from here, I wanted to have a big ending, so of course I went... And from here, I wanted to really change it up, so instead of just playing the typical... I wanted to try going to a minor 7 chord. And now when I'm playing the C minor 7, I actually notice there's this E flat major triad right here with just that C on top. So what I did is I kind of thought of it as just an E flat major triad, and I basically moved that up to F major. And from there, I kind of had in my head like the typical, I don't know how you would explain it, but it's like the typical Broadway ending where it's like they extend it further and further, where it's like, and you're expecting to hear this, but instead you hear, and you go up a half step and play a major chord, and you basically just keep doing that forever. And it just creates lots and lots of tension, and that's basically what I wanted to do. So basically it's E or C minor 7, but I'm thinking of it as E flat major 7, or a type of E flat major chord. And then I kept the melody note the same, but I just moved this to the next triad, which is just F major triad, and then you just put the C on top. That would be like an F major, well, that would just be F major triad, because the C is still just part of that. It's just the 5th of that. And from there, I just went up a half step with that triad, but again, I kept that C note the same. Then you get this cool sounding chord. And that would be, excuse me, F sharp major with that C note, which would be like the sharp 11. So kind of like a Lydian sounding chord. And from there, it was getting kind of impractical trying to do this kind of chord. Plus, this is a C anyway. So what I did is I just move the bass note down to A flat or G sharp, and then just played that because then the C is on top there anyway. So I got, and then from there, rather than doing it again and prolonging it more, I decided to just end it there and move up to this B flat major chord. But instead of just doing the triad, I decided to try a B flat 7 sus chord and then resolving that to B flat 7. And from there, I think, oh, I'm in B flat 7, so I just resolve that back to C minor 7 over B flat. And that way the C ends up on the melody note again, so you're still ending on that same note. So that's a lot to take in, but basically it's C minor 7 to F major triad to this F sharp Lydian chord to A flat or G sharp major, and then B flat 7 sus 4, B flat 7 to, I guess that would be like an E flat major 7 with the B flat in the bass, and then I just go to the sixth of that. Alright, so that is that entire arrangement just broken down for you, and the reason why I chose every chord basically. So every chord has a purpose behind it, of course, and I'm usually trying to lead each chord into the next chord. That's why I add a lot of those dominant 7th chords before the next chord. Alright, but anyway, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown of my little Christmas arrangement that I posted, and I hope you learned something new. Let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments below, and I will catch you all in the next video. So yeah.